Good afternoon, folks, and welcome to today's webinar, Reverse Mortgages, Social Security Planning, and Tax Bracket Management, presented by Dr. Tom Davison with me, Don Graves, as your facilitator. I am glad that you're here with us. Social Security and reverse mortgages have formed an unusual alliance, not for us who are in the business, but recently the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau wrote a paper or a technical brief about the strategy, to which, if some of you saw my video, I was very excited about that. Their conclusions I wasn't excited about, but I was certainly excited about the article for two reasons. Number one, optimizing Social Security by deferring it is a strategy that every baby boomer needs to be aware of. So I was glad they highlighted it. And number two was that they talked about the reverse mortgages being a way to do that. And they came away with saying it's not a good way, but how many folk even knew that you could defer Social Security with a reverse mortgage? I was glad for them to put that on the forefront. And we'll get to that. Helen Keller was once asked, is there anything worse than being blind? And she said, yes, having sight but no vision. And today you're going to see some things that you haven't seen before, but that doesn't mean you'll have vision. I hope by the time we're finished, you'll have a better, deeper understanding of how this tool works and the places in which the strategy might make sense. CNBC last year wrote an article that talked about cash-strapped boomer. You can retire using your home equity. And I love the quote by our colleague, Jamie Hopkins. He said, retirees simply cannot afford to ignore home equity as an income source and still meet their retirement goals. A powerful statement, one we'll be talking about today. And why is that important? Because the U.S. Census Bureau said in 2008 and reaffirmed it in 2016 that for the average married couple retiring at 65, they got less than $100,000 in savings, but about $192,000 in home equity, which means the majority of their wealth is in their house. Now, most of us understand retirement to be like the metaphor climbing Everest. On the way up Everest, we're focused on asset allocation during the accumulation phase, and we're diversifying and we're balancing certain things, and we reach the top and we plant our flag and we say, we made it. We've hit our number, only to discover that the mountain was a little bit bigger than we imagined. And so we finally get to the top and we start on the way down. And that's not asset allocation, but income allocation, diversifying our income among various sources, each designed to create sustainability and purchasing power that lasts for all of our retirement. But the danger is on the descent. As most people know, out of all the people who've died on Mount Everest, 2/3 have died after reaching the summit. The American College identifies 18 major risks in retirement. There's some that say they're 27. There's some that say they're 9. 18 from the college. Longevity, inflation, excessive withdrawal risk, number 8, market risk, sequence risk, so on and so forth. But the biggest is longevity risk, because it's a risk multiplier, as Tom Hegna says, which is the longer we live, the more likely that these other things could happen. And so today, as a part of our talk, we'll be covering the impact of this strategy, Social Security, tax bracket management, reverse mortgages, on longevity risk. And I wrote a summary of these. You can get that at 18risks.com if you want. Driving a lot of the conversation is this group you see on the screen right now. That's the baby boomers. If I were to ask people in a group, I said, now who is this? Someone would normally yell out, the Rolling Stones. And I would say, no, the Strolling Bones, because Jagger is really old right now. And we know all the baby boomer facts. 10,000 a day turns 62, and that's not really the big statistic right now. 10,000 a day are turning 70 and a half. And so the qualified dollars are coming out, the largest withdrawal in U.S. history of these retirement dollars are now coming out. They're going to live longer. They haven't saved enough. A large percentage, up to 68%, some studies say, are carrying some sort of mortgage or home equity debt. But the good news is 87% of them will own a home. 87% own a home. And so housing wealth is simply a resource that cannot be ignored. So when we look at the typical retirement planning picture, we have a person's income, investments, and insurances, and then we've got to, as advisors, manage that through systematic withdrawal, a bucket approach, a flooring approach, or Dr. Wade Fowle says there are 39 modern ways to do this, but it all draws from the same three buckets. But what happens when we add housing wealth to that strategy? What happens when we now include the reverse mortgage? What happens when it comes to risk mitigation, longevity, and some of those other factors that we included? So before we get to Tom, I want to talk about what is a reverse mortgage, just as a refresher. Well, four words. Four words will help you next time you're in the barber shop or the beauty salon or family reunion, so you don't get injured when you mention it. It's just a mortgage. Four words. It's just a mortgage. So a reverse mortgage has been around 29 and a half years. It's a federally insured loan that allows those aged 62 years or older convert a portion of their home's value, turn it into tax-free dollars without having to make a monthly payment, giving up ownership or coming off title to the home, or without having to repay more than the home is worth. The amount of money you can get is based on three building blocks: the age of the youngest borrower, the value of the property, up to the lending limit, and then the interest rate associated with the program. A reverse mortgage must be a first mortgage. On existing mortgages, home equity loans have to be paid off. And the average 65-year-old today can get about 50% of their home's value up to the lending limit. That will change October 2nd, but today it's about 50%. You can have the money in a lump sum, a line of credit, which we'll focus on for this talk on Social Security, monthly payments, term payments, 10-year payments, or a combination. So Tom will cover all of those. And finally, the loan gets repaid when the last surviving borrower permanently departs the home, that is, moves or deceases. At that time, whatever proceeds were advanced, plus any accrued interest, should you have not made a payment, has to be repaid, and 100% of all remaining equity passes on to the heirs or the estate. I had a chance to be with Tom in the top left-hand corner and some other folks at the Center for Retirement Research at Boston College, and interviewed them after the session, and I asked them what surprised them the most about the reverse mortgage, and these four said the line of credit. And I want to explain this line of credit, and then I'm going to pass this on to Tom Davison. One of the ways that a reverse mortgage can be set up is simply by establishing a line of credit. Got a built-in guaranteed growth factor, cannot be frozen, canceled, or reduced as long as the terms of the loan are being met. So a $200,000 home for a 65-year-old made about $100,000 available. And over a 31-year period, if it had not been accessed, it grew to $608,000. Let's look at a $400,000 and a $600,000 home. And so here it's simply a function for 29 and a half years of the reverse mortgage that allows it to be converted into this fund, as it were, access to the appreciating equity in your home that can be converted. Now, knowing that strategy, and I do a whole webinar on this, so I'm not going to unpack it today, but knowing this, I want to now turn this over to Tom Davison to talk about how do we use reverse mortgages to defer Social Security? Is it a wise thing to do? When does it work? When maybe doesn't it work? Tax bracket management. And then at the end, we'll talk about recovering a potential loss deduction that can be very, very significant. Tom, I'm going to pass the screen to you.
Okay.
Oh, wait a minute. Did I?
So we didn't rehearse this part, but
That's okay. If you've got a double screen, go back up to where.
Yep.
And go back and you're going to hit Display Settings. So go back to your PowerPoint.
I'm sorry, go back to what?
Go back to your PowerPoint presentation.
Yep.
And go to slideshow.
Yep.
And up the top, Display Swap. There you go.
Got it. Is that it?
Yep, and I think you can expand it up to the right there, so it covers the full screen.
Is that showing a full screen now for you?
Not for me, but in the top right hand. Yep, we're all good.
Yep.
Okay, you got it, Tom. I'll put myself on mute.
Okay, here we go, folks. So Don's already mentioned the topic, and so diving into Social Security claiming. The whole idea of claiming is, do you start it? You have a choice of starting at 62 or 70 or anywhere in between. And how do you start thinking about, for this particular person, what's their goal, and how can they best use their Social Security to meet up with their situation? So you can think of Social Security claiming from two different perspectives. Most people think of it as, how do I maximize my lifetime income, which is certainly a valuable idea. Second way, and it's actually the one I favor, is how do I reduce my financial risk over my lifetime? Because in some cases you can can achieve both goals with the same decision, but that doesn't always hold true, and we'll see a little bit why. So maximize income is often people's goals, and for actually a very large part of the population, that's a very good goal. But people often think about maximizing income from a mistake they make, which is that they underestimate how long they will live. And the other thing that always drives people when you offer money is, I'd rather have money now rather than money later. But the biggest risk for many is running out of money late in life. And that's why this business of how do you come down the mountain that Dawn talked about is such a big deal. So everybody's got typically 2, 3, maybe half a dozen different financial tools or characteristics. Out of all those, Social Security is unique. And it's important to think about that so you can take advantage of the unique features. It's government backed. It is not affected by bad luck like the stock and bond markets are. Once it's set up, it's what I call automatic money. It just comes. Once you're set up and going, it's hard to do stupid stuff later and goof it up. It's inflation adjusted, so it maintains purchasing power. And it's also tax advantaged. You always get some kind of tax break. It may be completely tax-free. Maybe half of it goes into your tax. The most is 85%. So you can spend more of it as a result. So you can think of this in a combination with longevity. On the left-hand side of the picture is a way to summarize financial resources. You're underfunded, you have low resources, you're underfunded for your lifetime. The other end is you're well-funded, you've got a relatively large amount of financial resources. You've got choices of starting Social Security at 62. That gives you the highest long life risk. If you live a long time, you've got the highest risk from your Social Security decision. Or you can start Social Security very late. You've got the lowest long life risk because you're pushing the most dollars into those late years, and we'll talk about that. This box up here, if you're underfunded, a lot of times you need to start Social Security early because you just don't have enough money. if you're well-funded, that generally means you can afford to wait, and then you can apply Social Security to that long life risk. And in that case, the risk management of a lifetime risk is, it trumps the current need. The lifetime risk is the biggest thing. A play on words. How long do you plan to live? If you walk up to somebody and say, well, how long do you plan to live? They'll, I'm 69, so I'll say at least 88. And what people have in mind is, when do I die? But plan to a financial planner means something else. It also means, how long will your financial plans support you? So if I said 88, but I actually live to 95, will my financial plan support me that long? So for financial planners, the focus is on the second part. How long will my plan support me? And starting to get a handle on the key variables here, life expectancy is one of those. And let's take a little bit of a deep dive on this one, because a lot of times people don't quite understand the term life expectancy. And as an aside, Don had set up this topic some while ago, a couple of months ago, and then in the CFPB report came out that Don mentioned, and that was a very fortuitous thing. As it turns out, Don was pointing out the positives. He's a creative guy, and he thought up a couple, but the CFPB report made a lot of mistakes, and we'll talk about some of those as we go through. Life expectancy is a median. What's a median? If you had a statistics class back in the day, well, it's a 50-50 split. So an easy way to think of it is 50% of the people die before that life expectancy and 50% die after it. Social Security has a big database on how long people live, because they're trying to stretch out the payments as long as they live. So, and a large percentage of people are in the Social Security databases and whatnot. So it reflects nearly the whole US population. And their data indicates that if you're alive at age 65, the median death for people is about 85, a little bit shorter for men, a little bit longer for women, but it's about 85. 1 in 5 live past 90, and 10% live past 95. So not only do half of them live longer than the median, but 10% of the whole bunch live, actually in this case, 10 years past the median. So the distribution of life expectancy is very important, but usually the only thing you hear is that number. In the case of Social Security, you hear 85. So to play around with this, I did some life expectancy calculators on the internet. These are kind of fun, and they'll give you a better picture that is tuned to people. And we'll see coming up that individual characteristics make a big difference. So what I did was I used my own general data, except I pretended for the exercise here that I was 62, which is the age I would be if I was really making a decision about Social Security claiming. If I look on the Social Security website to say, what's my life expectancy, they come back with 84. The other, which is in line with what I just mentioned before, because I'm a male, age 62 for this exercise. So you can get on, here's the website, you can get on it and try it too. Well, I have a few others that I play around with from time to time, so I tried them, and my life expectancies came in the low 90s, 91, 93, so forth. And again, that means I got a 50-50 shot at making it that long, but a 50-50 shot of living longer than that. So to say that I'm likely to die at 85, 84, that's that's not all that likely, actually. So what are some of the things that affect life expectancy? And as an advisor or a reverse mortgage professional, you're sitting down with somebody. So a lot of times you've got a pretty good idea of kind of what their financial picture is by the house that they live in or something else that you've heard. It's harder to get a handle on their life expectancy. And that's where these life expectancy calculators come in. But it turns out that people with more wealth, more education, being a female, being married, and a whole bunch of other factors, including drinking a daily glass of wine, which I started again after I did these life expectancy calculators, a lot of these things can enhance life expectancy. Well, they can also do it the other way around. Life expectancy is reduced if you have less wealth, less education, if you're male, if you're single, and a bunch of other things like you don't wear your seatbelt. How much difference does one of these things make? Well, it turns out I saw this, being a financial planner, always interested in the wealth part of it. And I saw this graph on a study that Wade Pfau and a couple of other people did recently. Maybe a little hard to read, but it's for males, and across the bottom, it's plotting their household income percentile. The middle of that is the median, and what it's graphing is the difference. So right there, that's the median life expectancy. It's called 0 in this one because it's right at the median. If you are low, don't have very much income, you might die 2, 3, or 4 years earlier. The more wealth you have, you might live 4, maybe even 5 years longer. So the spread here is about 8 years of life expectancy difference just based on wealth. And now you can start factoring in education, female, and so forth. So one observation of that is for many traditional users of reverse mortgage, they're going to benefit by claiming Social Security early. That's trying to reinforce the point. Delay is not a good idea for everybody. So how long do you plan to live? Well, this is starting to give you an idea if you want to tune it to an individual. What age does your financial plan end? Well, at my plan, I used to be a financial planner on a firm here in town, and our default was to do it to age 95. We tended to be dealing with people that had more wealth, more education. Many of them were married. So we just pick a number. If we had to pick a number, we'd do that. I'd often ask people to do the life expectancy estimators, and some did. So age 95 is how long your plan would go. That's different from how long do you think you might actually live. Don mentioned this before, and it bears repeating, that longevity is a risk multiplier. So by itself is the most important retirement risk. One way to think about that from a planning point of view is your mental abilities decline, especially financial ones. That's actually one of the fastest declining ability that you've got. Watching TV, that mental ability goes on for many more years than your ability to think about interest rates and things like that. The goal of financial planning is to get the most out of all of your financial resources. So you start using this word holistic, which is, can you bring all those things together? So a holistic plan for Social Security planning is going to pick up both spouses if married, going to think about, like all their resources, investments, annuities, are they still working or would they work part-time, any pension income, Social Security, as well as everything else. And income taxes, especially for the wealthier, make a big difference. You got to include things like that. So this is a complicated bunch of stuff. Each one of these resources works differently over time. So you need software modeling to do that. You can't just do simple spreadsheets like the CFPB did. And it really takes typically Monte Carlo type modeling to factor in variability, perhaps variability on life expectancy, variability on investment returns. It's complicated enough you can't just sit back and look at it and say, well, I think the answer is X, because there's no single answer. There's going to be a variable set of returns. And the software modeling with the Monte Carlo techniques are designed to help you pick up those things. A key observation out of that is what you're really going after is I get a picture of somebody's net worth every year. And how does that net worth change? Notice I'm not saying, what is your loan balance? I'm not saying, what is your house value? Those are the only things you really see when you do a reverse mortgage projection. But what are, how do those changes impact everything else? And the reverse mortgage itself, the HECM itself, has an impact on each of those other resources, not just the house. If you've been listening to Don's earlier seminars, you've heard a lot of things about, well, if you've got an investment portfolio, can you combine your reverse mortgage payouts and the line of credit with your investment portfolio to get more out of the investment portfolio? And it turns out you can. There's like 6 major different ways you can do it. So then you get into which is the best fit for each person. But that's an example of the interplay of the reverse mortgage and investment portfolio. Likewise, there's interplay between that and home equity, interplay with income tax. So you need to roll all those things together to get the best answer. Again, simple spreadsheets really are not up to the task of reflecting most people's financial circumstances. I'm not going to talk through the basics of calculations of what your Social Security number is, or how much more do you get if you delay it a year, or you delay it from 62 to 70. I did mention one example of those, because I'm assuming you're going to find that a whole bunch of places. But let's do a simple true-false quiz about things that impact your Social Security delay. So the first one is, claiming strategy is more important for married people than single. And the answer to that is true, because the survivor is going to get kind of the best of each of the ones that you had. So personally, I started my Social Security, I'm 69, so 3 years ago at 66. My wife's putting hers off until 70, and then I'll start up my my full Social Security benefit at 70, because that's what so we balance that to end up with more total dollars once we're both 70. Half of people live longer than the median age. Well, it should be a giveaway if you knew what the word median means, which is, yeah, every half of people will live longer than 85 if that's the median age. So the answer to that is true. You can delay from 62 to 66 or to 70 or anywhere in between. So you got a range of choices. The answer to that is true. A particular calculation was, if you have about $1,500 of Social Security at age 62, you just have to believe me that this one's true. If inflation ran at 3%, then you're getting around, if you started at age 95, it would be about around $4,000 a month of Social Security coming to you. So inflation matters on Social Security benefits. Claiming strategy depends on your other financial resources. That's something that we've talked about a bit. If you're underfunded, you just got to have money. You're going to take Social Security early because you really don't have any choice. That's an example. So the answer to that is true. Social Security delay can improve success when living on investments. I think a lot of people believe that. I do have an example of that. So the answer to that is true. Social Security is subject to tax. Well, we've already talked about that. Some for very low income, 0%, at high income, 85%, 50% in between. True. Social Security is tax advantaged. $1 of Social Security is taxed as less than $1. At the most is 85%. And if a HECM is used for Social Security delay, you may have HECM dollars left over after doing the delay, depending on how much you used every month along the way of whatever your delay period. So the answer to that is true. So the answer to all of these is true. Now, the reason I set it up this way is to see how the CFPB report dealt with these various factors. And they ignored effectively all of them. So one of the first thing I noticed when I read through is their projections, when they did a simple spreadsheet, which violates one of my other rules, and their projections ran through age 85 and stopped. So that's one of many things that they ignored that are important decisions in the Social Security claiming and how that might interact with a reverse mortgage. So I have some good things to say about the CFPB report. I thought it was well written in the sense of the grammar and the English was clear. They had a wonderful set of footnotes. Their math and their logic was not so wonderful. So I've already mentioned that it applies to half of the population, and in fact, it's the half who die earliest and for whom Social Security should start early. Their goal is to maximize short-term dollars, ignores longevity risk. They didn't include any spending inflation, but on the cost side, when they looking at costs, they compared it to a reverse mortgage. And on that side, they had a built-in inflation because they had today's interest rates, which reflect an inflation factor. They didn't use the Social Security tax advantage. They ignored impact on other resources. There was a little bit of actually not a little bit, an $80,000 line of credit at the end of the 85-year period, age 85. They ignored that. They also charged a HECM monthly service fee, which is almost never used. So the Social Security delay can work very well. And I'm going to go through an example. Oops, let me answer this. It may be a problem with the webinar here. Hello? I can't talk right now. Thanks. Sorry. It actually turns out to be related to this talk, but I can't talk right now. So here's a little example, Monte Carlo analysis of a Social Security delay. It's a simple one. There's a retired single woman. She's age 62. She plans to live to age 95. Her overall tax bracket's pretty high. She lives in California. That adds a bunch, and she gets federal tax coming in. She's got a pension which annually pays $60,000. Pretty good Social Security payout if she starts at age 62. Be obviously more if she were to start later. She's got a $500,000 IRA, and it's growing at around 4% a year, some volatility. So at 4%, I'm sorry, the 4% is if she would take out 4% a year, she'd get $20,000 of that. The income before tax is, if you add those numbers up, is $102,000. The but after you apply taxes, it's less than her living expenses, which are $96,000. And over there on the side, she's got a $200,000 reverse mortgage line of credit. So let's put those things together and see how it works. If she starts Social Security early, what you see here are two different Monte Carlo analyses. If she starts it early, the Monte Carlo success rate is awful. Only 5% of the time does she die with money. Her portfolio starts off at $500,000, goes up a little bit, but her spending and taxes and whatnot are just dragging it down. So around age 82, she's really out of money, and she's living to 95. That's why her success rate is very low. However, the delay strategy works actually very well. She uses a reverse mortgage to fund early spending. It doesn't make it all the way to 70, but it makes it about 6 or 7 years, and before she starts living on her portfolio. And then she ends up with a 90% success rate, and her portfolio balance is not a whole net worth picture, but her portfolio balance is growing all the way out to the end. There's a bunch of details on this on my blog to point to a particular, if you want to learn some more about it. But here are some of the conclusions. Obviously, adding the reverse mortgage means she has more assets to spend. She's got the $500,000 IRA and the $200,000 HECM. The IRA is only effectively worth about $333,000 to her after the tax hit that she needs to pay as she takes money out. So the HECM is not as big as her IRA, but it's not too far off either. The delay maximizes her Social Security. They're 75% larger payments at age 70, and she picks up any inflation growth along the way, and inflation in this study was running about 3%. It reduces the portfolio draws after the Social Security starts, and again, Social Security is tax advantaged. Only a part of that can be taxed, so she's getting more Social Security, but she's not paying tax on all of it. A key thing, and what's really driving it, is the investment portfolio is untouched until age 68. So that's when the portfolio draws start. So it needs to support 6 fewer years of that whole period. So it also has those same 6 years to grow before the withdrawals start. And this in turn reduces the thing everybody talks about, which is it reduces the sequence risk of starting early. Well, now I just jumped ahead too far. So that strategy, we could just go back to this picture. That strategy worked very, very well. It was you need to understand that this was a cooked up strategy to demonstrate that it could do that. In the software world, you'd call that a corner case, a little oddball case over there in the corner, but it's designed to be dramatic, and I hope it is. And most people are going to be, somewhere in between these two pictures, maybe closer to the left than to the right because of things like the tax brackets that are in play here. But it's clearly making the point that the Social Security delay, along with a reverse mortgage, can be very powerful. So if I were to think about this in general, I don't know a whole lot about the particular person I'm talking to, but we're thinking about how to do a Social Security delay. Then the most versatile approach, because I don't know a whole lot about them, is I'm going to set up a variable rate reverse mortgage with a line of credit. From that, I'll either set up monthly income or let the person draw as only when they need it. I'm also going to recommend that they pay down the reverse mortgage loan when it makes sense for them to. And we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail coming up. Reason for paying it down, there are a couple. One is the line of credit has a solid, actually to a very good growth rate. And building up the line of credit makes more cash available later. And it also naturally lowers the loan balance when you leave the home. So you're getting a couple of good benefits out of it. So that this pay down approach is often very important if you leave home before death. And also the topic coming up is you get a possible tax deduction from making payments on the loan. For just a minute, let's talk about the loan growth rate and why I think that is so good. A loan has three components: an index, a margin. These are the two interest components, and also, whoops, I did it again. Also, mortgage insurance. Starting on October 2nd, that ongoing mortgage insurance is 0.5%. Right, for earlier loans, it's 1.25%. So, going a forward-looking example, if you had a loan with 1 month LIBOR, maybe that LIBOR is 1.25%. Maybe it's a 3% margin loan and 0.5% of mortgage insurance. A loan is going to grow at 4.75% in this example. How good or bad is that? Well, on an absolute basis, you can't answer that. But one way to think about it is, what kind of return can you get on something that you can invest in? And I went to BlackRock, which is the largest asset manager in the world. Every month, every quarter, they put up what they think annualized nominal returns are, from cash at 2% to equity type things like international large cap, maybe at the 6.25% return. Over on this side, on the right-hand side, is volatility. That means it's jumping around. So their projection would be a 60-40 portfolio, 60% stocks, 40% bonds. Might have a return of around 5%, but coming with a volatility around 9, 9.5, or 10. So it's going to vary quite a bit. Some years it might be up 18%, other years it might be down 18% from that average. Where would a HECM, that example loan, fall on here? Well, it'd fall over here on the left-hand side, which is about the same expected return, but much lower volatility. And it's that lower volatility that really makes a difference. HECM, or I call them reverse mortgage line of credits. A HECM line of credit now might be around here, a little bit lower, but as interest rates go up, the loan, being a variable loan, will go up as well. So important growth to get out of the line of credit compared to anything else you could invest in. So it's not like parking money in some dead zone like a savings account today paying 0.25%. It's very competitive, and in fact, because of volatility, has an advantage over your 60-40 portfolio. Okay, so what we've really talked about here is a shift in a lifetime planning paradigm. Historically, you might think of aging as go, slow go, no go. Then you die, and it turns into, so what does the estate look like? Well, with a reverse mortgage in the picture, that paradigm needs to shift in one important way. And I can draw a picture like this, which is, there's some point in time, for a period of time, you're at home with your reverse mortgage. But what if you move? So it puts a new benchmark in there. What if you move? And then finally, there's an estate point out there. So this part right here, what happens if you move, is important, and it takes these planning models to figure that out. It's really asking a question of, what is your net worth all the way through this area? Have you drained your net worth because of the reverse mortgage loan balance? Or maybe you've increased it, like the lady that we saw in our previous example. But what is it? So that, are you at risk if you have to leave? Because people worry about the impact of the reverse mortgage. So leaving a home before death has new consequences, whether you leave by choice or by need. And getting a handle on that net worth is the planning step. So that's really the key. And it takes software to actually do that. And you're not just looking at the reverse mortgage loan balance. You're looking at the totality of all their resources and what's happened over time. Let's spend a few minutes on income taxes. And actually, that phone call that was coming in was from a tax expert by the name of Jim Thiel, or Don knows. I'm not a tax expert. I've done a lot of annual tax planning. So let's hit on a few of those things. Non-recourse loans aren't actually very well understood, but there is a fair amount of useful background on them. Key things to know, I think most people readily know this part of it. Withdrawing loan proceeds from a HECM are not taxable, so it's not bumping up your income tax. While there is a loan balance, the interest and mortgage insurance premiums accumulate, and there's no tax deduction available until payments are made. When payments are made on the loan, if you're living in the house and you make the payments, you might get a tax break. So the focus then is on annual tax planning. Once you leave a house, then the loan becomes due, or you might leave it because you move or because you die, and then there's choices around the beneficiaries. So important to work through those. But for our purposes today, we're going to talk about the annual part of it. So a key question is, how much might be deductible over a lifetime? The answer is, can be many thousands of dollars if you get a reverse mortgage up front and let the balance grow and grow and grow. There may be thousands of dollars, maybe $1 million of deductible interest and potentially mortgage insurance in there. So let me focus just on annual tax planning. This is getting to the point where every year as a tax planner, you try to figure out, should I do anything special this year? You can make payments on your reverse mortgage while you're in the house. Can you deduct anything from those payments? Maybe. Let's eat cake first. The way this cake comes in, because there are different charges within the loan balance. The principal you take out, the interest that is built up, if there are any servicing fees, which are relatively rare, that's the next layer up, and on top of it is mortgage insurance. This cake comes into play because when you make a payment, you're eating your way down this cake from the top to the bottom. So the first payments that you make will go against mortgage insurance. The next one's against servicing fees, if there are any. And then you finally get down to the interest, which is typically the big thing. And then last to the principal. So you could make a payment on mortgage insurance, and if that's not deductible, it doesn't help you at all. Mortgage insurance is deductible for acquisition debt. So in the reverse mortgage world, you hear words like H for P, which is using a HECM to purchase a house. That you can, then acquisition debt may be deductible. Interest is often your major deduction, and that's the one that pretty much everybody can use. Let's talk a little bit about acquisition debt and home equity debt. Acquisition debt is the debt that you incur when you acquire, which means fancy word for buy a house. So it's a debt for acquisition, construction, or substantial improvement. We did a major remodel in my house, changed 6 rooms and took 6 months. That would the $100,000 we spent would qualify for acquisition debt. If you refinance an existing mortgage, the acquisition debt character moves on into that. It's deductible on debt up to $1 million. But if you make very much money, if you make very much taxable money, you can't deduct it. If your gross income was over $109,000 for a married couple, you can't deduct acquisition debt. So this one's a little bit harder. Mortgage insurance premiums can be deductible, but only on acquisition debt. And by the way, this is one of these things that Congress has to extend every year since it was put in back in 2006, and they have not yet extended that into 2017. So today, you can't deduct mortgage insurance premiums, but probably in the middle of December, they'll come around and do something. And if you're an AMT, you can't deduct them. So there are all these more rules. Home equity debt is simpler. And again, that's comes from the word because you're borrowing on a home's equity. A HELOC is a common example. Interest on home equity debt is deductible on up to $100,000 of debt. You could have $1 million of interest on that $100,000, but it's only the $100,000 of debt that is the only interest on that $100,000 counts. Again, we got to worry about alternative minimum tax. And if the interest gets really much bigger than the original purchase price, there becomes another limitation, which is rarely in place. So annual tax planning. A couple of key things about annual taxes. To reduce your taxes, your deductions must be bigger than your standard deduction. This is a big deal for people with reverse mortgages because a lot of them are using the standard deduction. If you're married, $15,000 is the standard deduction. But you can use a technique of bunching where you move deductions from one year into another to maximize your deductions. And reverse mortgages actually help bunching because you can make payments on the reverse mortgage and you get to choose when you make them. So as an example, if you wanted to make payments on your loan, you could make them every month like you would your traditional mortgage, but you may find it more beneficial to make a whole year or actually make 2 years of payments in 1 year and then skip a year and make them again because it's moving a whole bunch of deductible things into 1 year. Some of your other deductions are pretty easy to bunch and depends on the rules in your area, but things like real estate tax in Ohio, we can move around pretty easily. Charitable donations you have good control over, and a whole bunch of others. And even some medical can be bunched. You stock up on medications, you time procedures in the year that you're going to try to ramp up your deductions. So there's an opportunity there to do annual tax planning, which is really taking advantage of the tax deductions available when you make payments on the reverse mortgage and using the reverse mortgage draws, which are tax-free, to perhaps put off some other income and some that you see elsewhere. Okay, I've used up a little bit too much time. Where are we now, Don?
We got a few more minutes, Tom, and we've got some questions coming in, so I want to give you a chance to answer them. If you've got the loss deduction, can you broach that subject? Not necessarily go into it, but that's something that's been very fascinating to hear about, and it ties into what we were talking about here. Do you have a slide on how that works or how it could work?
The deduction that I'm sorry, what was it?
The one, mom and dad got a reverse mortgage. They took out $200,000 all in one fell swoop to pay off the existing mortgage. And when they died, their balance was $400,000. So they accrued interest of $400,000. Excuse me, had interest of $200,000 on top of the original principal. The loss deduction that you and Barry Sachs had talked about, how does that work? How does that $200,000 benefit the estate?
Well, okay, so This is a classic situation where people don't ever make payments, so the interest deduction does build up. A key thing in order to take advantage of that buildup is you've got to pair the deduction with a whole bunch of income. If mom and dad didn't have much income, then and they didn't really have any assets, they can't take advantage of it. Maybe their kids could, but they can't. On the other hand, if they did have a big IRA, for example, then that IRA could be used as a take a big withdrawal out of it, and you could use part of it to pay down the loan, or another way that could happen is if you pass the house over to the kids and let so they inherit that. The kids inherit the house. They effectively inherit the loan as well. And if there was an IRA that the parents had, and they transfer that to the kids as well, then the kids could cash out the IRA, pay the tax, and use it to, they sell the house to pay off the loan. They've got a big tax deduction and can offset the IRA withdrawal with the tax deduction that they inherited. I didn't do a very good job of laying that one out, but the key thing is laying out or figuring out ahead of time where you've got this big deduction. Can you use it? Can your kids use it? Can you pair the two up on the same tax return?
Tom, let's take a few questions while we have time. And those, if you've got a question, go ahead and type it in now. It may take a minute or two to get to me. If we don't get to your question before this is over, I'll send them to Tom to answer, and then we'll email you. All right, David says, did you compare to utilizing IRA money in the gap period from 62 to 70 and letting the HECM grow? That came from David. Did you compare? Yeah.
Okay. That was one of the things that was included in this study back here to make letting if you drawing the money out over time. This was a relatively short time, but the HECM could grow some over that 6 or 7 year period. The growth, you've got to do the math to see does the HECM growth make up for the delay. It's a great example of actually going through a financial model to see which of those is going to pay off.
Larry asked a long question, Tom, and I'm going to have to send it to you. I'll try to read it, but it may be too long. And Larry says, with all the products and software illustrations available to advisors, I feel the best, parentheses, for someone with a few bucks solution is a properly structured max-funded IUL, minimum DB, and a policy review each year during accumulation, and another review each year during distributions, i.e. policy loans versus fixed loans, etc. This policy can include some long-term care benefits. Over the long term, nothing can be more efficient for retirement benefits than this type of account. Do you agree, Tom?
I'm going to pass on that one because I can't do that one in my head.
Okay, I'll send it to you. Keith says, is there any value in spending assets early for the offset, therefore allowing the line of credit to grow and giving more home equity later on?
Sure. Anytime you've got, an easy one is, I know people that have a whole bunch of money in savings accounts. This is a kind of a trivial one, but it illustrates the point. The savings, so imagine that you had $100,000 in a savings account and you just keep it because it's comfortable, and you're earning 1/4% delay, 1/4% interest on that. If you got a reverse mortgage um, and then didn't tap the reverse mortgage, but decided to live on that 0.25% savings account as long as it lasted, your reverse mortgage line of credit would be growing all the way along. So a trivial example, but it illustrates the point of relative return on those two assets. You're swapping a low return savings account for something with very high confidence. The reverse mortgage is going to be there and grow. And so that would be an excellent trade-off.
Now, I don't know if Keith was asking this in reference to the slide on the screen now, Tom, but if we were to adjust this question to say, set up the reverse mortgage, if this lady here set up her reverse mortgage early, but still spent down her portfolio without using the reverse mortgage to supplement and running it out, meaning switching it, does that work?
In this case, likely not. I have other case examples, and there's a nice one on my blog that illustrates doing exactly that. So it can work very well.
Okay, great. Sandy says, if you make payments on a HECM, do you get a 1098 mortgage entrance statement each year?
Yes, as long as you get enough interest. There's a threshold, I don't remember what it is, it's like $600 to $800 a year of interest before their issuers are required to send out the 1098s, 1099s. So small amounts are not going to show up in the way of a form. You can, if you figure it out yourself, you can still deduct it. You don't need to form the 1098 to report it, but otherwise you will get those.
Great. Bart says, is there a big difference between a HECM and a HELOC? What are they?
Oh, there's a whole bunch of differences. HELOCs, a couple of things. HELOCs are issued typically for like 10 years. They can be canceled anytime. A lot of times it's for many people, you can actually borrow more money on a relock instead of a HELOC. Once you have a relock, you get to keep that for the rest of your life, or at least the rest of the time you're in your house. The HELOC, as I said, can be canceled. You have an option of making payments on a relock at a certain point, typically 7 or 10 years into HELOCs. Then you got to start paying them down. So now it's 10 years in the future, and where's that money going to come from? With a relock, you've got a choice. There's a whole list of advantages to the relock as opposed to the HELOC. And again, there's a thing on my blog site that picks up on that, which actually that blog is listed on the bottom of the screen here, toolsforretirementplanning.com.
Great. John says, Tom, can you comment on the advantage of the line of credit now that October HUD changes will lower the amount available, higher costs, lower MIP growth, etc.?
Well, you're not going to get, the changes are that the amount of money available up front in general is going to be lower, and the growth rate is going to be lower because the ongoing MIP is 0.5% instead of 1.25%. So on a relative basis, the new ones are not going to be as powerful as the old ones. On the other hand, when I first started drawing pictures of growth of line of credit, they were incredible. They were really too good to be true, and I honestly believe that they were too good to be true because loan balances could grow far faster and far higher than home values over time. That's not sustainable for the reverse mortgage world. And actually, we didn't get into this, but it actually could create tax problems for individuals depending on how they pay that loan off and what happens at the end of the loan. It's not a very well understood area. So in many ways, so the kind of mind-blowing growth rates and growth levels, I think, are now under control, and the program is sustainable. Many of the same principles, all the same principles, are going to apply in financial planning contexts. They're just not as lucrative.
Yep, I agree, Tom. And John, what I would say is, if today the interest rate growth factor on a HECM is 6%, after October 2nd, it could be 4, 4.5, or somewhere around there, which is much more sustainable. I won't have to change very many of my slides at all because the same principles apply. It just won't, the growth won't be as large. So, Tom, we're going to, Robert says, do both husband and wife have to be age 62 to get the relock? No, only one spouse has to be age 62, Robert. And the last question, L says, if you start taking Social Security at age 66 and are coming up on age 67, can you suspend distributions and reapply at age 70 with an increased benefit?
Yeah. You don't have to start at 66. If you start, I think there's something like a year period. You could say, whoops, I didn't mean to, and pay them back and then restart later. So there's a little bit of flexibility there.
Great. Roberto slid in the last question. Does a relock negatively affect seniors receiving Medicaid? Tom, you can answer that.
Well, I always, whenever Medicaid comes up, I always have a response, which is check in your local state, because Medicaid is a state program and mileage can vary. In general, the thing that Medicaid looks at is account balances at the end of the month. So if money comes in and goes out before the end of the month, in general, I don't think it affects Medicaid. It is not going to show up on your tax return either, because these are loan proceeds instead of, like work income. So in many cases, I think in the vast majority of cases, there's no impact on Medicaid, but I would always check with an expert who knows the rules in your particular state, and pay attention to how you actually get or when you actually get the money.
Great. All right, Tom, we're going to land the plane here. We've gone a very robust discussion, and we thank Dr. Tom Davison, my good friend. And Tom allows me to repost his content on my website. So if you can't get to Tom and you know me, or I invited you can see most, if not all, of Tom's. I haven't updated his in a while, but you can get him over here. And he has a wonderful, on my website, HECM Advisors Group, the SS video, SS video. And you can see Tom there kind of elaborating on this in a different way. All right, folks, thanks so much for being with you. We'll talk with you next time. Bye now.